Hi, I'm Feroz Khan, and welcome to Drag and Drop Low Code Unplugged, the podcast where we explore the game changing impact of low code in software development. Join me in insightful conversations with IT leaders and passionate low code enthusiasts who are at the forefront of this digital evolution. Together, we'll explore how early adoption of low code is giving businesses a competitive edge on a global scale. We'll discuss its impact on software development, dissect its role in transforming businesses, and uncover the ways in which it's reshaping career trajectories. So whether you're a seasoned IT professional or a curious enthusiast, be sure to tune in as we share success stories and unravel the mysteries of low code. Subscribe now and stay tuned for a front row seat to the revolution that's shaping the future of technology. So let's go. Hi Robert, how are you?
Feroz, I'm doing great, man. It is a pleasure to see you again. It's been far too long, my friend.
It has, and it's a pleasure to have you as a guest. I know I asked you a while back, and I was waiting till we're in a similar time zone. So like I said offline, you're my first not US based guest, but first guest for me being US based. So I appreciate you saying yes and being on.
I'm glad to do it, and hopefully it doesn't backfire on me.
I'm sure it won't. I'm sure it won't. It'd be good to kind of, for those who don't know a bit about you, a bit about your background, a bit about who you are, where you're from.
Sure, sure. So, hi, I'm Robert Carter. I'm the team lead for expert services for the Americas. It's a fancy title. Proud to have it. I'll talk a little about my journey. I've been in technology since I was very young, right? Basically, my dad brought home a computer when now everyone has it, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I got a couple gray hairs. And so not everyone had it when I was growing up. And I was very fortunate that my dad brought one, or my family brought one home
Yeah.
when I was about 8 to 10, give or take. And what ended up happening was I just took to it right away, mostly for games, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
But to give you an idea, this was pre-Windows, right?
Wow.
With command line MS-DOS to date
Yeah.
myself, dinosaur a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? But it's been an amazing journey to see go from that to
Yeah.
where we are now. And within a couple of months, I wasn't able to run certain games that I wanted to
Yeah.
run. And that was due to you don't have to think about this stuff anymore, but you had to think about things like memory management and disk management
Yes.
and this whole nine. And I took to that really quickly. I had different disks for like boot loading and things like that to run different types of things. And my dad later in life said to me, hey, within about 3 months, you were better than I was at
Wow.
computing. So that was
Wow.
obviously a big thing. And there was this magazine that had this really cheesy bird game programming code, and I didn't know what it was, but
Yeah.
we typed it in together, and there was this bird that would fly over and pick up an egg, and then it would go back and it would drop an egg in the nest. And when you see that and you actually wrote everything, it was really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's get a little more professional, right? So then I went to college. And that was where I started to really learn about like problem solving with technologies, things like flowcharts and pseudocodes and algorithms. So really how to do certain things, of course, in college, it's like sorting and
Yeah.
these various other things. And then also so that was a big trajectory forward. And then also learned a number of the different languages, which was primarily like functional languages like
Yep.
C and Pascal and these other ones, and object-oriented languages like Java
Yep.
and C++, right? So I did that, right, and then the next big change for me was that when you do it in college, at least at the time, it was all console based, right?
Yeah.
And so Windows had come out, Windows was out, but Windows 3 and Windows 95 had come out. And so everything was going graphical. And I still didn't have a good handle on that.
Yeah.
And my mom had a book that was, to date myself, Visual Basic 4,
Wow.
right? Which is old school.
Yeah.
And so I read that book from cover to cover.
Wow.
And so it was it taught you the basics, and then at the end of every of the chapters, and every chapter would go over something like how to create a form, how to print a document, whatever it was, right? And I did every single one of those exercises. So then when I had that, I really had a good handle on, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but I did have a good handle on how to develop applications. And so I ended up in an internship for an HR company where they had a hiring platform that was how to interview, which I know you're,
Yep.
so I've been doing that
Yeah,
part
yeah,
for a while, and and I'm sure we'll talk about that,
yeah.
right? And so they had a platform of how to hire competent individuals, and it was based on more than just technology. It was also well, it wasn't just for technology, it was also for any industry, right? And it was based on any thing you need to be hired for. You need to have certain technical skills,
Yeah.
but you also need to have a certain personality, usually, right? And so those vary. Right. So obviously in like a sales position, you need to be more extroverted.
Yeah.
You need, and not so much of say like the technical problem solving, whereas say what I do, a little bit more introverted might be better, where in the technical problem solving might be a little higher. Right. And so I rebuilt that entire application. And to give you an idea, the first one, the one that they had, you'd click a button and you would wait about 7 to 10 seconds for it to do something.
Wow.
And by this time I had upgraded to VB6, big upgrade.
Yeah.
Right. And when I clicked next on my version, it was instant. Right. So I knew I was onto something.
Yeah.
And I was the only programmer. I wrote everything, and it was a full Windows application, right?
Wow.
Printing, saving, just everything that would come with an application. So then what I wanted to do, one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to work on top secret military projects. It was just something that I always thought was super cool.
Yeah.
And that was actually my next job. Right.
Nice.
So at a very young age, I was doing my dream job, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And it started out as a VB6 developer. And during that time, this new thing called .NET came out. And so I was working on like a preview version of .NET, worked in 1.0, 2.0, right? And so and Microsoft is the stack has essentially been my bread and butter for the primary of my career until now. Right. And so I've got and it's been great. Right. I've got to work in all different types of industries. Like I said, the military industry, HR industry, casino industry of all things, gaming, education, health, energy. Right. And so I've been so fortunate to get to see the pros and cons of these different approaches and take all of that and absorb it. Then 2008 hit, financial crisis hit. Right. And I was working in that casino industry, and I can't talk about it, because there's NDAs and everything. But the entire division I was working for got shut down. I had also ended a relationship at that time. I'll get a little personal here.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I don't know that I want to live where I'm at anymore. So I threw everything in storage and I went on the road for a few months, and I got to see like all of America.
Nice.
A lot of my friends had gone out and moved to different locations. And so I would basically go and stay with them. And I was deciding where I wanted to live and what I wanted to do, etc. And during that time, a friend called me back. My very close friend called me up and he said, "Hey, I'm starting a wine, distribution company, and I want you to run. You're the best tech guy I know. I want you to run the tech side of the equation. We have the sales guy. I'm the CEO. And we have a marketing guy, etc." So we did that, and I'll just say, be careful starting companies.
I've heard that one quite a few times.
Yeah. So I know you're a co-founder.
Yes.
I hope it works out well for you. It did not for me, and I lost.
No.
Yeah, but anyways, ignoring that. So the one place I didn't get to visit was the Pacific Northwest. And so I was down back in, back in Southern California, and Intel, the one name that I'll actually name in this interview, called me up and they said, "We want you to come join us." And so I did that, And essentially, I was promoted to a tech lead in a week, which
Wow,
was
nice.
pretty amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
Intel was literally some of the brightest minds on the
Yes, of
planet,
course.
and so that was a big like, whoa
Yeah.
moment for me.
Yeah.
And so that lasted a while. It was great.
Mm.
Did some really neat things with them. And then I moved on, and I had a new job where I was working in the childcare industry, right?
Mm.
And so and this company was really messed up, right? They had not had a single bug fix deployment. It was so bad, not a single bug fix deployment in 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I ran like multiple teams on them, and we transformed them, right? And so that was really amazing to be able to do.
Yeah.
The first project that I did, their previous one literally died 2 weeks before the deployment, right? And so what happened there though was then I had a kid and I decided to
Mm.
take some time off, and the way it was handled was not very good. So
Mm.
I got a little bitter
Yeah.
towards it.
Sure.
So I knew I was looking for another job, and I was on LinkedIn. And I was posting for other C
Yeah.
sharp jobs, and OutSystems just kept popping up.
Mm.
It just kept saying like
Yeah.
OutSystems,
Yeah.
OutSystems, and I kind of looked at it and I'm like, I've never heard of this
Yeah.
company. I'm at a stage in my career where I want
Yeah.
kind of more established company.
Sure.
And after like literally 6, 10 times in a row, I said, all right, persistence is key, right? So I looked at it, and it's OutSystems, it's low code
Mm.
development. And the very interesting thing for Oz was I was actually working on something like OutSystems. However, I was doing it part time in the
Yeah.
background
Yeah.
while I was working a full time job, and I looked them up, and this company had 1,000 people, and they had been around for 20 years. And I said, "Oh my goodness, I need to talk to them."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we did, and I talked to one of the tech guys, and we
Mm.
just hit it off.
Yeah.
We just dove deep into all types of things, and just super bright guy. And I was asking him like,
Yeah.
what's the teams like? Because as you don't want to work with. You get to a stage in career, you want to work with people who are good.
Yeah. Of course.
Um, and you want to work on more complex things like creating boilerplate CRUD code is not something I'm interested in
Yeah.
anymore,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So they brought me on initially as a tech lead,
Yeah.
and I was one of the first. There was a team of less than 20 of us, just basically as the America takeover,
Yeah.
right? OutSystems, as you know, is pretty big in Europe, pretty
Yes.
big in APAC, had zero America's presence, right?
Wow.
So they brought me in as that. So I got thrown into the fire. My first, they trained me up. My first project was a 40-day tech lead coaching with their entire with a school system,
Yeah.
where we did best practices. And as a tech lead, it was primarily like delivery
Yeah.
and then and things like that. And so I'm part of the expert services team, right? So we do delivery and various other things. And there's also TSMs, right? The technical
Yep.
success managers. And we do very similar things, but it's different. The TSMs are so important because what they do is, hour to so many hours per week, they kind of keep the company on the
Yep.
guardrails. I like to call it
Yeah.
like the what do they call it? The bowling bumpers.
Yeah. 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 The bumpers. Yeah.
Expert services were a lot more immersive, right? So we will do things like code delivery
Mm.
or fully deliver it for you. We have a number of expert services from things like, like I said, like delivery to architecture
Yep.
assessments, performance assessments. And then also just beyond that, we'll also do things like not performance testing, but load testing,
Yep.
help you with your CI/CD platform, et cetera. So just a really cool set of services that we do. So yeah, pretty quickly I became a senior tech lead. So I was working with more complex customers,
Yep.
more enterprise style customers, more focused on things like architecture.
Mm.
And I started becoming a bit of a mentor to
Yep.
the tech leads and the developers. And then I became a team lead, right? So now I'm generally focused on things like mentoring the team, which I mean, it's a bunch of racehorses, the brilliant people, right?
Yeah.
it really is the steel sharpens steel or iron
Yeah.
sharpens iron or whatever that is mentality.
Mm.
So, but we do, when we start off a new allocation or when one of them starts off, we'll brainstorm about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll come to me with problems and we'll figure out a solution. We'll work on the architecture together. Still do some of the allocations, but it's a little less. Currently,
Yeah.
I'm on one, but
Yeah.
as you know, I do interviews as well
Yes.
for both
Yes.
internal.
Yeah.
Where we are growing our team as
Yeah.
well. So if let me shout this out for a sec. So please, if you really want a really interesting career, come talk to me. Find me on LinkedIn. Right, we can show you some amazing things. And then for external as well, right? We
Yeah.
augment teams, and
Yeah.
so you and I have been through that.
Yes.
Also, I do some developer relations, so I regularly speak at conferences, which is so awesome. I really love teaching and showing, talking about best
Yeah.
practices, and then also just meeting with the community. And then, as I mentioned, we offer those expert
Yeah.
services.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my short and sweet version.
No, that's amazing. That's an amazing introduction. And I wanted to go back to when you started with OutSystems. Obviously, you're new to the technology. And how, because there's this and this, there's this, when you're speaking to businesses, there's this thing about, if you can't hire OutSystems developers, you can hire a senior and train them up to be a senior pretty quick. So what was your personal experience of starting, learning the platform, and how quick do you feel you were kind of at that level?
Yeah. So great question. So just like you said, I had been a Microsoft developer. A lot of people bash Microsoft. They transformed and brought up
Yeah.
the entire industry. I mean, don't get me wrong, they played hardball,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they really brought us. They're one of the major catalysts of why we are at where we are at, right? Apple gets all the glory, but
Yeah.
really, they're the ones behind the scenes. So I was doing that, and then I had my knowledge of low code is actually based on a book from Bill Gates way back in like 95
Yeah.
called Business at the Speed of Thought, which today is a super interesting read
Yeah.
because he talks about what he thinks it's going to be like in 30 years, and it's literally
Yeah.
30
Wow.
years later.
That's cool. Yeah.
So it's really, email and Slack and, all those types of things. Cell phones essentially revolutionized, like he predicted, and of course he wasn't right about anything.
Yeah.
But he did predict this concept of a change of languages to where there would be like these boxes and it would be more flowchart based and you would really set properties. Now, does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, that is what OutSystems from
Yeah.
a high level brings to that. You really
Yeah.
bring in more of a flowchart style experience, right? And so when I saw it, first I started laughing, right? When I figured it out. But as we deal with many companies, it was a question of was this thing ready for enterprise development? Could it handle the things that say C# and the Microsoft platform could? To answer your question directly, my journey, we have a training plan that we do when we bring on new developers, many of which do not have are like me, they don't have any experience in OutSystems, right? And so of course it started with, well, at the time, 5 years to give you a marker. So at that time, it was the shift from 10 to 11. That's where we were in the market, right? So it also brought on the shift from the traditional style to the React style, right? And so I got trained in both at the time, and basically they threw me in the fire after about a month, like I said. What's been super interesting, and I realized it about 6 months in, is then I went back and did some C# coding, right? And it actually made me a better C# developer because it made me think in different ways of how to attack a problem. The same way that I think jumping from C to C++, which the big difference is object oriented. For those unaware, that's close to like structures and things like that, right? You can similarly have things in C, but you don't really think that way until you're really presented
Yeah,
with it. And so that's something that I experienced as well with OutSystems.
that's amazing. And as you're kind of now you're more a team lead, but you're dealing with customers a lot, and what's some common misconceptions that customers have when they kind of first bring out systems into the organization?
Yeah, for sure. So the big one is always the same. It's this is low code, and most people think of no code,
Yes.
right? And so when you think of no code, those platforms that develop end user websites, and they may have some configuration for like sending an email, but you quickly hit a wall,
Yeah.
right? Very quickly, the moment you want to do some kind of customization. So can it be used for more than smaller apps? And you know, absolutely, we have homemade or what's the term? We have companies that names
Yeah.
that that are all across the planet, multi-billion-dollar
Yeah.
companies that we have their core systems and we've revamped their core systems. We integrate with your existing services, et cetera, et cetera. And even internally at times, I get asked, so how do we can we do this? And my response is yes, we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then they go, well, how do we prove it? How do we explain that to a customer? Again, my response is because we've done it before,
Yeah.
right? The other big misconception is the upfront cost. That you look at the cost of OutSystems and you think to yourself, "Gosh, this is a lot of money," especially compared to now with I'll go Microsoft because I've been talking
Yes.
about this code is free,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And so there's this, but OutSystems is an enterprise solution, and it really encompasses more than that. It's a one-stop shop for your entire enterprise development ecosystem, right? And so when you factor that in, and then also factor in the deployments, everything you need to go to production, and then the time that you actually save,
Yeah.
it actually ends up being considerably cheaper than what you do, and you're able to get to your backlog. And so it's a mushrooming effect of cost savings effectiveness. Now, I know that sounds salesy, right? And I'm not in sales, but it is true. It is true.
Yeah.
And one of the things we focus on is not just getting your project out the door. I mean, it's obviously we try to get you to things like what we call first value, which is where you see a project on production. But then we also focus on so much more. Let's look at what makes sense to help transform your IT industry in order to optimize it for you. We have a number of best practices. Some of them will not apply to you, but most of them we find are true for almost every company in almost every industry.
Yeah. And you touched on best practices, and I wanted to talk about, and I know you've presented at some of the dev days about these topics, so I thought it'd be good to kind of share on a wider scale about, the challenges customers face when scaling and what best practices they need to kind of adopt to kind of be successful from day one.
Yeah, man, you should have come to Dev Days Austin.
It was at the time it was a long way to come for one day.
Yeah, I was in the zone on that one.
Yeah.
That was funny. You really missed out. No. Okay, so scaling, right? Scaling. There is a best practice referred to as DORA, the DORA metrics, and that's basically. It takes two main approaches to consider for scaling, for development at scale, and that is speed and stability. And obviously everyone knows what that is, but if you break down the speed, it's really the lead time for changes, which is how long do you go from essentially telling the developer go to the point that you are on production, and then deployment frequency, which is how often can you deploy, right? And then there's all the stability, which is time to restore services, which is, something really bad happens and you need to restore your services. And then the change failure rate, which is a combination of how early can you find the issue and how many failures, how many bugs are you getting. So what approaches do you take to handle this scenario? And the first is loosely coupled architecture. That doesn't mean, and so loosely coupled architecture is the concept of not having in OutSystems. They're referred to as server actions, and that creates a tightly coupled dependency. And everything has to go out together on a deployment. And there are times you want that, like when you're in what's referred to as the same vertical business domain. So, for example, like HR might be a domain, marketing might be a domain, sales might be a domain, and then whatever is particular for your business context, right? But then if you go across those domains, so when you're in those domains, you want to be tightly coupled, but when you're going across, you need to be loosely coupled. Why? Because you have a deployment that now, if you're tightly coupled, in order to deploy out, say, HR application 1, if it's tied to marketing application 1, then both those have to go out together.
Yeah.
The end result of that is you have to time them together, and the lowest common denominator wins, which is not fun. Yeah. And so that goes hand in hand, and also you have your foundational components as well. And so there's pros and cons of whether to take the loosely versus tightly coupled on that. I generally promote the loosely coupled. Then that all goes hand in hand with the domain-driven design, right? That's what I was talking about with the business verticals, and it's really taking that time up front to think about those verticals and not just start developing, because what happens is you start small, you have one application, you grow into a bigger application, and then you start to break off into, you have an HR, a marketing, a sales, whatever. And then eventually someone goes, oh, we need microservices across the board. Everything's got to be microservices. No. Right? You don't want to do that because you have some performance hits when it comes with that. But there's a right approach, right? And so, our expert services team can help you with that. Right? But I'll give away some of the stuff that we do that costs customers money. And so what you also want to consider is your team structure. And you want to align your team structure to many companies have it so that they may have like a UI team or UI UX team. Logic team, and then like a back-end team. And the net result of that is your applications or your architecture follows that process, right? Because you have that logical separation between them, right? And so what you want to do is have a team, what we refer to as a cross-functional team. And that is everything that you need: architect, tech lead, developer, UI UX, QA, engagement manager, and I think I'm forgetting, and I'm sorry for the people. But an entire team that basically owns one of those domains. So again, like HR or whatever that is. I know for you, HR is broken down further, right? But from a lot of companies, HR is a piece of it, right? So and that's exactly the point, right? Is that for you, it's different, right? And so you want to go in and think about what's right for your company, right? You have like the interview processes. We talked about the training a little bit ago, right? So those are your business verticals, right? And so the cross-functional team provides two things. One is it provides the knowledge. Everyone in that team has a deep knowledge of what's going on in that vertical, right? And so you can have people that own multiple verticals, but you do not want to have a vertical that's like got multiple owners with it, because what you need is someone to point the finger at. Right? And so that's another thing that comes with that, is that the team then knows what's going on. Also, you want your CI/CD pipeline in place, depending on, we have the everything on the back end to help you get from development to production, right? But if you're scaling, if you're, maybe you start with 100 users and then you come to us and you now at 100,000 users, every hole is going to expose itself, whether it be a security hole, an architecture issue which results in deployment issues, performance issues, right? Those just get a magnifying glass on them. And so one of the things we recommend is what we call the small batch approach, right? And so that is the idea of many companies will do a whole big update and then deploy it out to production. We don't suggest that, nor do we promote it. We promote the idea of A, getting it on production fast, and then B, pushing out small features or bug fixes. How small? Literally as small as you can get them. One bug fix, one feature, right, at a time. And there's things like feature toggle and these various other things that can help you because you have someone else working on another feature.
Yeah.
So you can turn that off and you don't have to worry about the deployment. But there are things you have to factor in with how OutSystems develops. So that leads us also into testing, right? So as you scale, right, there's a lot to think about. And I'll say here, like, you will think about these. It will happen. It's just A, how much pain do you want to go through? Like, based on how early you get it, and B, you know, how do you want to get there? So testing, most companies have a QA. They'll have acceptance criteria, and the QA guy will just go in and click to the buttons and test it out, and maybe you have some unit tests. A lot of companies do not have unit tests. If you do not have unit tests, just start. Just start today. That's what I keep saying to people. And OutSystems offers the BDD, the behavior-driven, domain-driven design, or behavior-driven design, which, if you're comfortable with unit tests, will help you with that. The other thing I promote for testing is what's called the Three Amigos session, right? And so that's the idea of usually the engagement manager will work with or the product manager, and we refer to them as engagement managers, will work with the subject manager, SME, the subject matter expert, and they'll come up with the tests together. And again, what we suggest is that you do have that the business, then that's really the business side. The Three Amigo session. So one amigo is the business, another is development, right? So you want either the tech lead and or the person that's going to be working on it, and you want the QA in there as well, because the QA will think, well, what if I enter in hamburger for my date of birth, right? So they think of that, where the developer just thinks of A to B, where the business side is thinking, well, what is it I'm really looking at, right? So you put all of those together, you end up with a really solid set of tests. Another thing to consider is code reviews and peer reviews, right? Code reviews, I think, are pretty obvious why. You have someone who's more senior than you look at the code. They can help you align with best practices. But prior to that, what we recommend is peer reviews. And so a developer will review another developer's code. And so there's multiple pros that come with that. The developer's cheaper, so that's good, right? So the business likes that. But then also it's a double training that happens. So if the peer who created it did something wrong and the other developer sees it, right, then they'll point it out and you hit it earlier. But then also the peer that's reviewing it, they may learn something based on how it's done, and now they're trained up on that. So that's really part of our enablement journey. Side note, we don't want to be a company that staffs with you. We look to people, companies like iTrack, great company.
Thank you.
Shout out to you. That promote that, right? We want to get in, help you get up to spec, right? Really, we want to enable you so that you do it yourself. And again, we have a number of tools to help out with things like best practices. Like I said, the BDD framework, Mentor Studio, so key. And then just simple tools like True Change. Obviously, you can't publish if there's an issue, but some of those performance things that just pop up really quick, it's just a quick way to get things done.
And when you're kind of speaking to customers about all this, obviously there's a mind shift change for them as well, right? Especially if they've been working on traditional projects, and obviously you yourself have gone from one to another, so you're changing the style
right now,
right? So how do you sometimes get some pushback from your suggestions from customers because they're kind of so used to a certain way?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a good question. So in the end, it's the customer's decision,
Yeah.
right? We can only guide them. We know the best practices.
Mm.
I tell the team regularly, like customers are looking to us
Yeah.
to guide them because we know what we're talking about. We have the inside track of
Yeah.
all of this stuff, right? So what I recommend to do, with the leads is say, look, yeah, exactly. It's the customer's final decision, but you have to explain to them why what they're doing is wrong. What are the ramifications of taking that approach, right? And then what do we recommend as the best practice? So one example, and I can't dive too far into it,
Yeah.
but a company has a control that they preferred the traditional route in, because it does some like auto resizing,
Yeah.
and we have a control in the OutSystems UI and OutSystems 11, the React code that does the same thing, but it just doesn't do the
Yeah.
resizing, right?
Yeah.
And so they created this control to this widget in order to facilitate that with JavaScript. And so, I said to them, I said, look, you can do this, it's your choice, but we recommend against it. We recommend you use the OutSystems UI built-in control.
Yeah.
Why? Because now you got something you got to maintain. And there's not really a whole lot of business good that comes out of it, right? So you have this thing you have to maintain. You have to consider, it has to be part of your ecosystem. Whereas literally, the OutSystems UI components, they just work, right?
Yeah.
So you're saving time, you're saving cost, right? So in the end, it's your decision. But yeah, that's an example of
Yeah. Yeah. And in the 5 years you've been working at OutSystems, obviously the platform's evolving, changing, releases, AI is now in the mix, mentors, released, can you kind of talk me through, in your time working with the platform, some of the key things that you think have really, one, made the platform even better, but two, what you're kind of looking forward to for the future and, things kind of that are there or coming out where, you feel it's going to be a game changer for customers or has been a game changer over the years?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, React was a game changer, right? Especially on the performance side. And that was actually something I meant to mention earlier, but
Yeah.
I got lost for a bit. And what a lot of companies will do when they go from traditional to React is, with traditional, you have a synchronous, a single-threaded preparation to basically grab all of your data, right? With React, you can have all of that data loading up separately, and then it just comes back and it magically updates the page. With traditional, you have the concept of like Ajax if you want to like kind of
Yeah.
post back to the server when you're doing something. With React, you literally just say, I want to refresh this data. Then you update an internal variable if you need to, and then everything magically updates. So that ODC is awesome. It had a few stumbling blocks
Yeah.
in the beginning, but really there's been such great strides in it over the last year. So I'm super excited on when we can say goodbye to O11 and
Yeah.
really have ODC
Yeah.
in place. It is a massive, massive investment that OutSystems has done, and make no mistake, it is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It is the future of not only OutSystems but of software development. Obviously, as you mentioned, Mentor. Behind the scenes, we're about a year ahead,
Yeah.
right? And so we are working on things that are super cool, right? And so we're releasing them incrementally as things that make sense. Like we just released additional data fabrics where you can connect to other databases, but then also small little things like right-clicking on an entity and choose create the entire CRUD. Right, I used to hate doing that.
Yeah.
Now it's just you just click on multiple ones, you hit create, and there's your whole layer. I love that the architecture is a lot more compressed. I actually, when I went through the architecture training, I asked why do we separate this when we have our 4 tabs? To me, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I guess I was right. But barring that, the other thing that I am super interested in is, um, and we've already done some of it, is the new industries, the new potential industries.
Mm,
So particularly IoT, the Internet of
mm,
Things, devices. There's this whole side thing of robotics coming along.
yeah.
Man, I want a robot that's going to paint my walls, do
Yeah.
dishes, give
Yeah.
me give me a combo of C3PO and R2D2. Yeah. So those are the types of things that I'm very excited about.
That's amazing. And working with customers and without mentioning customer names or anything like that, can you tell me a success story that you've been involved in, that you've gone in, and made quite a big impact, and and
Yeah,
and, and
for
also
sure.
and also just kind of you find sometimes with these things, the customer also probably at the beginning didn't think you would make the impact that you have made.
No, they sure did not. For one thing, and it was a very politically charged environment on top of it. There was a whole Power BI team, and then of course a C# team, and so there was a constant,
Yeah.
back and forth, and they didn't want to convert and things of that nature. But I had just been brought to the senior tech lead
Mm.
level, and they trained in architecture, and I'd proven myself a few times, and
Yeah.
so um, I was super fortunate that I was tasked with running from a technical side one of the largest contracts in OutSystems.
Mm.
Um, and so they're essentially a reinsurance company. For those of you that follow anyone on OutSystems, I'm going to say a couple things that'll probably make it obvious.
Yeah.
But there was so much going on, right? There was a Lotus Note. They had Lotus Notes, and it
Mm.
was a huge transformation, hundreds of applications,
Wow.
right? But Lotus Notes does not do architecture. And
Mm.
and so there's no foundational layer in Lotus Notes. And so originally the business manager over on their side came to me and said, we just want to do a direct transformation. And I said, no, you do not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, I said, this is what we need to do. I
Yeah.
said, look, we need to find the common core components, they have branches all
Yeah.
across the planet, a multi-billion-dollar
Mm.
company, right? And so I said, look, we got to take some time and we got to analyze a number of these. I can get, and he said, well, we have to think of speed. We have to prove ourselves. And I said, I understand that.
Yeah.
What we can do, because you have to accommodate business. You have
Yeah.
to. It's just the way it works. So I said, listen, what we can do is, give me a couple of applications to analyze. We'll start with that, right? I'll
Yeah.
find the commonalities between them. Things like branch locations, currency, currency types,
Yeah.
things of that nature. So we did. I created the foundation, or me and the team
Yeah.
created the foundation. But at the same time, um, we started with, and he wanted to start with a big app, and I said, no, 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 let's not do that. Let's start with a
Mm.
small app. I think I talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
First value, and for us, we had an application on production in 6 days
Wow.
for a highly
Wow.
red taped situation. Right? It was a small
Yeah.
app. It was very small, but
Yeah.
an average mid-size application takes 6 months, give or take.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, not every app was that fast.
Yeah.
But then eventually where we got to pretty quickly in about 2 months was we had a solid foundation in place, and we could set up multiple teams, like lots of teams, more
Mm.
teams than I usually recommend.
Yeah.
But we had isolated it so well that we could have teams working on each of these applications. And the end result of that is we had 30 applications live on production in 9 months
Wow.
for a reinsurance company,
Wow.
which is notoriously slow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I said, there's certain industries, government and
Yeah. Yeah.
banking and these various other ones. And
Yeah.
that's another one, right? They're extremely conservative in their
Yeah.
approach. And so that was a real big deal. And then we had to think about HIPAA requirements, GDPR requirements, encryption at rest. The
Mm.
Great Wall of China is not just a physical wall. It's also,
Yeah,
you may have
yeah.
noticed, it's also a data. You
Yeah,
basically like can't move information between them. And so that was really amazing. And it really, I would say, trajected my career forward. And there's certain,
yeah.
you and I both have a couple of gray hairs. You can
Yeah,
look back,
yeah,
see
yeah.
certain things in your life
Yeah, exactly.
that
It's
have certain,
experience. I call it
yeah,
experience.
yeah, there you go. And so there's certain things, both positive and negative, the
Yeah,
choices that you make, right? And that the net result of that, is what trajected me most
yeah,
likely into the team
yeah,
lead. And that's super interesting because now where I'm at is, by the time a problem gets to me, it's really challenging, right?
yeah,
Because like I said, the team I work with, a
yeah,
bunch of rock stars,
yeah,
like they're just amazing. So if they're having, but it's that means the company has tried,
yeah,
from potentially a TSM and the tech lead, and
yeah,
so that's an aspect of it
yeah,
as well. But
yeah,
yeah, that I would say. And last I heard, I think it's been 2 years, and I think they
yeah,
just, don't quote me on this, and
yeah,
unfortunately this is
yeah.
recorded. Not unfortunately, but you know what I mean. But I
Yeah.
think they just broke the 100 app mark,
Oh,
give or take.
amazing. Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, that'd be
yeah.
really cool.
I'm not on it anymore. Like we
Yeah,
moved over to
yeah,
a
yeah,
TSM,
yeah,
who that guy is also insanely
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. So
I think I need to get that customer on as a guest so they can talk about their experience.
you should, yeah, yeah.
And we spoke about this offline as well. And as someone who's been working with you, and you've been kind of part of the hiring process. I wanted to kind of ask you about, as someone who's interviewing developers, and obviously the OutSystems developer community is very big, and expert services want to hire the best experts. It's in the name. So in your eyes, what makes the perfect developer, and what do you look for when kind of interviewing someone?
Yeah, yeah. I know why you're doing this, Feroz. Okay, no, no. We do have a rigorous process, right? And for exactly that reason. Unfortunately, something that happened recently is I did bring someone on board,
Mm,
and it didn't work, and I had to let them go pretty early,
mm.
because for various reasons they were kind of conning our
Yeah.
situation. Every once in a while, someone will get past,
Yes,
right?
they
And
will.
so
Yeah.
but we have a very rigorous thing. But if you join us, or if you work on a project with us, it will take your careers in insanely
Yeah.
awesome directions, right? We work on just the coolest things, it's really, really fun and exciting if you're into that stuff. And
Yeah.
if you're not, don't try to work for us, because
Yeah.
I want people that are excited,
Yeah. Of
right?
course.
Yeah. So that's one of them, right? They're excited.
Mm.
They're excited about technology. They see the potential of low code, right? That we just hired at the same time we hired another guy.
Mm.
He's really on board, and he's just been,
Yeah.
absorbing all this information. Just completed his first allocation, rocked
Nice.
it. It's
Yeah.
been awesome. So yeah, I'll say a negative is I have caught a couple people doing the AI cheating thing,
Ah. Okay. Interesting.
or bringing up like Wikipedia or
Yeah.
something like that. And if I catch you in that, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
that's
Yeah.
it. I don't mess around with that. It's okay if you don't know,
Yeah.
right? That's
Mm.
okay. And so that's actually one of the things I do as well, is I will question people until they don't know.
Mm.
I've been fortunate in that I've been able to do that so
Yeah.
far. And because they're in an interview, so they're
Yeah.
nervous,
Of course. Yeah.
I'm just like, whatever. So
Yeah.
I'll keep drilling on
Yeah.
details and details, and the reason for that is I want to see how they respond when
Yeah.
they don't. If they're trying to fake it, that's
Yeah.
an issue, right? So those are kind of the things. The certifications, right? Those
Mm.
are important. Those are what'll get you in the door.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like we definitely notice when someone has multiple certifications,
Mm.
and we've had generally good results, but not always.
Yeah.
But that is something that You know, if you just think of it conceptually, if you have two of the same people and one has 3 certifications and one has 12 certifications, who do you want to interview
Yeah, of
first?
course. Yeah.
Of course, I'll look at their background, the length of time they've been in
Yep.
technology, the different potential fields,
Yeah.
how long they stay at jobs, if it's, which
Yeah.
can be okay if it's a
Yeah.
contract position.
Yeah.
I have certainly worked small
Yeah.
jobs for only
Yeah.
3 months, but if it's 20 years and everything's three
Yeah.
months,
Hopping around. Yeah, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
that might be an issue. Um, and I look for someone who can, who's generally well spoken as well, who can dive into some
Yeah.
of the aspects of what they're looking for. And with that, another way to say that would be I will ask them about complex ideas that I think they can answer, but how they answer. Like I don't. You hear me talk. I don't use a lot of big words, right? I try to speak in a way that even people that are not in technology can
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying. They of course don't get the underlying energy of
Sure.
it, but they get the concept, they get the
Yeah.
idea, right? And so the idea of explaining complex ideas simply is another thing that really shows that you have a real solid grasp on what it is you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's a great point you touched on is about you don't have to always know everything, right? I think people they focus too much on just trying to answer everything and making sure, even if they don't know it, rather than just say I don't know it, they'd rather just give the wrong answer. And you touched on it, and now you're adding AI into the mix, and it you don't really know how much of it is knowledge and how much of it is kind of supported by AI, right? So that could,
I got caught in it.
yeah, yeah,
It fooled me, but I mean,
yeah,
once you get on board, I'm
yeah,
going to find out pretty
yeah,
quickly.
exactly.
Uh, but yeah, it's if you can't say that you're not sure or something like that, and you just
Yeah,
answer, it's a red flag.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Great advice.
And that's one of the things we teach as well, or that I teach with the team as well, is like
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with going to
yeah,
a customer and they ask you some question. You're like,
yeah. Don't know.
I will get
Yeah,
back to you on
yeah,
that. Like,
yeah. Of
that's a
course.
great question.
Yeah,
That's literally usually how
yeah,
we phrase.
yeah, yeah. Amazing. And going kind of a bit for yourself, and working with OutSystems, and I don't know if you've done anything. You're a tech guy, so you might have things you like to do on the side. If you were to build any app using the OutSystems platform, what would it be, and why?
Well, I can build any app in
Yeah,
OutSystems.
I know.
Not to toot my own horn, but to no, but I talked about the robotics that managed to
Yeah,
get someone to come, get a robot to come paint my house.
yeah,
I'm really excited about that.
yeah,
Right? That's where I think and but OutSystems is not the right platform for everything, right? So it's definitely for enterprise systems and various other things, but where you actually need real time, and a lot of companies will say they need real time, but they need near real time, where you
yeah,
can have, a tenth of a second. Real time is like, health devices that keep you
yeah,
alive,
yeah.
and missile defense systems,
Yes.
and where life
Yeah,
or
yeah,
death
yeah.
is.
Mission critical. Yeah,
We don't
definitely.
recommend OutSystems for those scenarios, but we do recommend them for the aggregation of the information that comes from those systems, right? So we still have a place in those types of
Yeah.
industries. For an app, an app, I guess something I ran into recently was I'm going to a concert with my friend here coming up, and unfortunately I realized that the following day was Mother's Day. And yeah, and so we booked the tickets.
Yeah.
And and then we realized the situation. And so what we ended up doing was we just said, all right, we're going to take off like it's the Saturday night beforehand, and we're just going to come back super early.
Yeah.
So I'll be able to still do that.
Yeah.
But that would be interesting. Something that you say, hey, I got this task coming up, and tell you, hey, these are the things you might want to think about.
Yeah, yeah, red flags. Look out for these red flags. Yeah,
Red flag.
yeah.
You don't, with the calendars, it doesn't really say any of that
No,
unless it's a direct
yeah,
overlap.
yeah,
So maybe something that kind of, hey, Mother's Day is the
yeah,
next day. Maybe
yeah.
you want to reconsider
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Reconsider your situation. Yeah, definitely.
Fortunately, my wife is super forgiving. Speaking of, she thinks drag and drop is a wonderful.
Oh,
She's
amazing.
brought it up. She's brought it up to me 10 times since you
Oh,
asked
that's
her.
great. That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
so
really
she's just
cool.
like, make sure you tell him I love his name. Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
I'll let her know.
And a final question. I think from speaking to you, I don't think you were ever a skeptic of low code. For
I mean, I
me,
was building, yeah,
yeah,
like I said,
I think, your experience was very much you were doing stuff already, then you come
yeah.
across OutSystems and you've loved it. But, I don't know if you ever speak to skeptics or, what would be your message to the skeptics of today, even though OutSystems and low code is very well known now, even compared to, you look at 5 years ago in the US,
Yeah.
it probably, even though it was around compared to now, there's a big difference. It's all the analysts are talking about it. What would be your message to those people?
Yeah. Why? Why are you a skeptic? I actually really like hearing this stuff. And then, usually it's technical folk that are just comfortable. Like I said, I
Yeah.
had been on Microsoft I'd worked in a number of different platforms, but Microsoft was certainly my bread and butter for the primary of my career
Mm.
until I came here. Um, what is it that you don't think it can do? Because the performance is obvious. Like, for instance, I forgot to mention this, I also work sometimes in pre-sales with customers as
Mm.
well. And so I'll just show them some of the accelerators, and one of them is you create an entity. For those that haven't used it, that's a table. You create that entity, and then you can just take that entity and drag it onto the screen, onto your work area, the UI flow work area, and two screens will be created for you. One is a list that is sortable, searchable, paginated, etc., and then one is the detail where you can do that. And so when I'm talking with customers that are new, I'll ask them about their business, and as they're literally doing it, I will just kind of be working behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's obviously crazy rough,
yeah.
right? But then I'll come into them and say, okay, this is what I see for your entities. Now watch this, and I'll drag like three of them over. And obviously, you do want stuff that doesn't just have the list and details,
Mm.
but for a back office application or
Yeah,
an administration section, where now, but previously you'd have to spend 6 to 9 months on that,
yeah,
literally knock it out in 36 hours or
yeah.
something, or
Wow.
a week or something like that, or even shorter. I mean, that's always a wow factor. That's another thing we like,
Yeah,
is the wow factor, where we do something amazing for you. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're also not, we can do it, but we're also not the right company for like high performance games. So if you're looking to
mm.
make like Call of Duty,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
frameworks you should use that
Yeah.
are better for that. But yeah, the performance, I always think of it as like, it just removes the dredge, the red tape of, if you've been in the industry, you got to set up the vision, and I'll stick with Microsoft, the
Mm.
Visual Studio, the SQL Server. You have to do all that administrative situation, and then you have to create the connection, the database connection. It's far easier now than it used to
Yeah,
be, but it's still just a whole thing before you can write your first line of business-oriented code, right? And the business does not care about all of that back end stuff. They want a business application that helps them solve a problem, right? That's
yeah,
that's why
yeah.
they're
Of
paid.
course.
That's why you have a check that comes from a
Yes.
business, right? And so it removes all of that, so that the moment you get in there, the security authorization as well, the moment you get in there, all of that is removed, and you just immediately start working on the business aspects. So, long way of saying, tell me why.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Well, no, I appreciate you speaking to me. It was great to talk to you, and hear all your kind of insights and your 5 years, and even prior to that, how you got to where you are, and it seems like you've had a great journey with OutSystems so far, and I look forward to seeing where it develops and where it goes, and continue working with you and speaking to you.
I do as well. And thank you so much for this opportunity, Feroz. I really enjoy chatting with you, and it's a pleasure, man.
Amazing. Thanks, Robert.
All right. Thanks.
Take care.